I'm Valerie Brooks, 32 years old, and nothing could have prepared me for the moment my brother Marcus slapped my 6-year-old daughter Sophie across the face at our family barbecue in Austin, Texas. But what gutted me even more was hearing my father Leonard chuckle and mutter, "Guess someone finally taught her manners." My mother Colleen let out a light laugh, like it was nothing more than a spilled drink. They assumed no one outside the family would ever know. But what they forgot was that my cousin's husband, an aspiring filmmaker, was documenting the reunion for a school project complete with a lapel mic and rolling camera. That recording, it changed everything. But before I tell you how Marcus's world came crashing down, leave a comment if you've ever had to protect your child from your own blood, and hit subscribe if you believe silence only helps the abusers. Growing up a Brooks meant knowing your place. Mine was the family disappointment. Marcus, on the other hand, was the rising star. He was charming, obedient, and just manipulative enough to earn my father's praise. I was different. Sensitive, thoughtful, unwilling to bend to expectations that didn't fit me. That made me difficult in my mother's eyes. "Valerie's always been dramatic," Colleen would whisper at holiday dinners. "Not like Marcus. He gets it." By the time I was 17, I'd stopped arguing. I faded into the background, counting down the days until I could leave for college. That's where I met Daniel. He was calm, grounded, and treated me like I mattered. We married when I was 21, too soon by most standards, but I needed out. My parents came to our wedding, barely hiding their disapproval. Marcus brought a bottle of wine that cost more than my dress and delivered a speech that sounded heartfelt until you listened closely. "I never thought Val would find someone who could handle her." He laughed. "Daniel, you're either brave or crazy." It was always like that. Smiles with knives behind them. Daniel and I built a quiet life in a rented duplex on the east side of town. I finished my marketing degree while working weekends. We were far from wealthy, but we were content. When I found out I was pregnant with Sophie at 25, I cried out of joy. I thought maybe finally I'd get to create the kind of family I never had. For a while, it felt like I had. Until that barbecue. Until Marcus laid hands on my daughter, and I stopped being quiet. Sophie was born on a misty Thursday morning, 7 pounds 4 ounces of bright-eyed wonder. She had Daniel's steady blue eyes and my thick auburn hair. As I cradled her in the quiet of that hospital room in Austin, I whispered a promise I intended to keep. She would always feel seen, valued, and deeply loved. She would never have to earn her worth like I did. But when Sophie turned 3, the cracks in my marriage to Daniel became impossible to ignore. He stayed out late, dodged questions, and his affection cooled like forgotten coffee. One evening, I found texts from someone named Rachel on his phone. At first, he lied. Then the truth poured out. He'd been having an affair with a co-worker for 6 months. We gave therapy a shot, but Daniel's heart had already left the room. By the time Sophie turned 4, we finalized the divorce. I didn't tell my parents the real reason. I simply said we grew apart because deep down, I knew they'd spin it into another mark against me. And they did. "Men don't walk away from good homes," Valerie, my mother, said flatly over the phone. "What did you do?" Single motherhood hit harder than I expected. My job as an office coordinator at a small event planning firm paid the basics barely. Rent, preschool fees, groceries, every bill felt like a test. When emergencies hit like a flat tire or an unexpected ER visit, I had to call my parents for help. Each check came wrapped in judgment. "You should have chosen better," my father would say. "Your brother would never let himself get into this mess." Marcus, of course, was thriving, or so it seemed. He'd been promoted to executive director at his firm, married a dermatologist named Kendall, and bought a house in a gated community just outside San Antonio. No kids yet. They were focusing on careers, he'd say, smugly. Every visit, my parents compared me to him, like we were in some silent contest. "If only you'd applied yourself like Marcus," my father repeated with weary disappointment. "You could have had something respectable by now." Still, I wanted Sophie to feel connected. Maybe she'd have a better experience than I did. So when the annual lake house gathering came around this summer, I agreed to go for the first time in 3 years. "You sure?" my best friend Nina asked when I mentioned it. "They're still family," I answered, heart uneasy. "And Sophie loves the lake. I could manage one weekend for her." Sophie was thrilled. At 6, she sang constantly, filled our apartment with music and motion. I just hoped the joy she carried would survive the weekend. Sophie had my fierce spirit and her father's confidence. She filled a room without apology, something I'd never been allowed to do growing up. As we folded clothes into our weekend bags, she asked eagerly, "Will Uncle Marcus be there and Grandma and Grandpa? Can I swim in the lake every day?" "Yes to all of it," I replied, masking the unease twisting in my stomach. I left out one detail: my uncle's husband Peter, an amateur filmmaker, would be recording the entire weekend for a Brooks family legacy project. My father had insisted it be done mostly to showcase Marcus's spotless record and professional success. As we drove the winding 2-lane road toward Canyon Lake, I silently repeated my go-to phrases. "It's just 3 days. I can do anything for 3 days. You're not the same scared girl anymore. You'll protect Sophie the way no one protected you." But now looking back, I realize how naive that was. You can't shield someone from a storm by walking them into it with nothing but a paper umbrella. The Brooks Lake House stood like a symbol of everything I'd never been: stone arches, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wide deck that overlooked the sparkling lake. As I pulled our modest sedan into the circle driveway, I caught sight of Marcus's luxury SUV and my parents' spotless Lexus. The pit in my stomach tightened. "We're here," Sophie squealed, already unclipping her seatbelt before I'd shut the engine off. Her enthusiasm was radiant. She had no idea what kind of tension simmered inside those walls. "Can I go see the lake right now?" she begged. "Let's settle in first," I said, forcing a steady smile. "And say hi to everyone." The front door opened just as we reached the steps. My mother stood there in perfectly pressed linen pants and a pale pink sweater despite the stifling Texas heat. Her platinum blonde hair was salon smooth and her eyes swept over me like I was a receipt she couldn't return. "There you are," she said coolly, then softening as she turned to Sophie. "We were starting to think you'd backed out." "Traffic was slow," I said, accepting her arm stiffly. "It's good to see you, Mom." Inside voices bounced off stone walls and polished wood floors. My father was deep in conversation near the fireplace, pausing only to glance up with a nod. Marcus appeared from the kitchen with Kendall at his side, arm looped casually around her waist. "Well, well, the runaway sister returns," he called out with a smirk. "And with little Sophie. You've gotten big since I saw you last, kiddo." Sophie edged behind me, suddenly shy. "Hi, Uncle Marcus." Kendall stepped forward with her usual poise, offering a warm smile. Unlike most of the family, she had always treated me with kindness, though carefully, like someone aware of the dysfunction, but unwilling to challenge it. "It's really nice to see you both," she said, hugging me lightly before turning to Sophie. "Your cousins are down at the dock if you want to join them once you're settled." "Mom, can I go?" Sophie asked, practically vibrating with excitement. After we unpack, I promised with a nod. Marcus leaned against the kitchen island, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass, and watching me with that smug half-smile. "Still working at that little events place?" he asked. "What is it you do again?" "Someone's assistant office coordinator," I said evenly. "And yes, still there. I got a promotion last month, actually." "How nice. For you?" he replied with thinly veiled condescension. "I just landed a 7-figure deal with Crosswell Holdings." "Dad, did I mention the bonus check? Like clockwork." My father turned, clapping him on the back. "That's my boy, always pushing boundaries." Near the bay windows, Peter adjusted his camera gear, avoiding the spotlight. He'd married my Aunt Linda, my dad's sister, 2 decades ago, but remained an outsider in spirit. As I passed, he offered a quiet nod of solidarity. "Trying to catch everyone's best angles?" I asked. "Trying," he whispered back. "Your dad wants plenty of footage of Marcus discussing his career. I've got mics set up in the main rooms for candid moments." Our assigned bedroom, Sophie's and mine, was the smallest in the house, tucked beside the laundry room with a window facing the neighbor's fence. As we unpacked, Sophie beamed while chatting about the lake and her cousins. "Can I wear my blue swimsuit? And can I sing the new song I practiced all week?" My chest tightened. Her bright energy, her fearlessness. It was everything that had been stripped from me at her age. Of course, sweetheart. Just pick the right time. Let people settle in. That first night unfolded like a script I'd memorized, dinner conversations centered on Marcus's latest wins, while my mother nitpicked every detail about me. "Your hair's getting long, Valerie," she said, giving me a once-over. "Don't you think a cleaner style would look more professional?" Then, with a glance at Sophie, "She's very spirited. Maybe some routine would help." I bit my tongue as I watched the cousins, ages 7 to 12, instinctively uphold the Brooks family hierarchy. They corrected Sophie's speech, dismissed her stories, and excluded her from their lakeside games with a practiced grace only adults could miss, but no child ever would. After dinner, while rinsing dishes at the farmhouse-style sink, Aunt Diane approached me. "Valerie Marcus mentioned you've had a rough go of things since the divorce. There's a part-time position opening in our company's mailroom if you're interested." I dried my hands and offered a careful smile. "Thanks, but I'm actually up for another promotion at Horizon Events. I'm leading a small team now." She gave a sympathetic pat to my arm, eyes filled with polite disbelief. "Well, the offer stands. Sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves about our capabilities." Later that night, as I tucked Sophie into bed in our tiny guest room, she was unusually quiet. She traced lazy shapes into the quilt with her finger. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" "Cousin Madison said my song was annoying," she mumbled. "And Uncle Marcus said girls shouldn't be so loud if they want people to like them." I swallowed the rising heat behind my eyes. That script was far too familiar. "Sophie, your voice is beautiful, and you have every right to use it. Some people don't understand that excitement isn't a flaw. It's a gift." She looked at me thoughtful. "Grandpa said you were loud when you were little too. That's why you got in trouble a lot." I inhaled slowly and exhaled through the frustration. "Well, sometimes adults are wrong, even grandparents, especially your mom's parents." That made her giggle. I kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow will be better. We'll go swimming and do something fun, just us." But as I lay in bed later staring at the uneven ceiling and listening to muffled laughter and clinking glasses from downstairs, I couldn't escape the gnawing guilt. I had hoped this trip would bring some healing. Instead, the Brooks family lake house was exposing every old wound and opening some new ones. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the gauzy curtains. Sophie popped up with renewed energy, yesterday's sting, forgotten in the promise of lake adventures. "Mom, wake up." Uncle Peter said they're making waffles in the big room. She was already dressed in her favorite blue sundress, yellow butterflies dancing around the hem. I checked my phone, 8:17 a.m. I had hoped for another hour of sleep, but her joy was hard to resist. Okay. I laughed. "I'm up. Let me get dressed and we'll head down." The big room, what my parents grandly called the Great Hall, was a cavernous space with exposed beams and floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. It doubled as a dining hall and performance stage for Marcus's ego. By the time Sophie and I arrived, the crowd was already buzzing. My father sat at the head of the long, reclaimed wood table, half hidden behind the Wall Street Journal. My mother, ever the perfectionist, hovered near the kitchen island, directing the weekend catering staff with clipped precision. Cooking for her own family, of course, was beneath her. Marcus and Kendall sat beside my father, deep in discussion over real estate investments and private equity. "Good morning." I offered the room my voice light, but tight. A few distracted nods. No one looked up. "Valerie, coffee's on the buffet," my mother said, not breaking stride. "Sophie, the children are eating at the little table by the windows." Near the bay of windows, Peter was setting up more sound equipment, carefully clipping wireless mics around the room. Capturing all the fun and dysfunction, I whispered as I poured a mug of dark roast. "Your dad wants authentic family interaction," Peter replied, raising his eyebrows. "For posterity." At first, breakfast passed without incident. Sophie sat at the kids' table, making cheerful attempts to chat with her cousins, who largely ignored her. I made small talk with Aunt Carla and her husband, weather, property taxes, lake algae. Half an hour in, the kids moved to the far end of the Great Hall to color and play. The adults lingered at the table, mimosa glasses now refilled, voices rising with each pour. I kept one eye on Sophie, who had started humming a tune while coloring. Her quiet humming turned into soft singing, an upbeat song from her favorite animated series, something about best friends and adventures. Her clear, sweet voice carried easily in the echo-prone space. Marcus's jaw twitched with each note. I saw him glance at me, repeatedly, eyes narrowing. I looked away. The other children clustered around a board game, none inviting Sophie to join. Still, she sang gently, cheerfully. "Valerie," my mother called out across the room, tone clipped. "Don't you think Sophie's being a bit distracting?" Before I could respond, Sophie launched into the chorus, her voice rising, not obnoxiously, just joyfully. "For God's sake," Marcus snapped loud enough to silence nearby conversation. "Can you control your child for 5 minutes?" I rose, meaning to gently redirect Sophie. But my aunt asked me something, and I turned just for a moment. Just long enough. Marcus shoved his chair back with a harsh scrape and strode toward the kids' corner. Sophie looked up at him, confusion blooming in her expression. Then he struck her. The slap cracked through the room like thunder. Sophie staggered back, stunned hand flying to her cheek. The entire room froze. Sophie's coloring book slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor. A bright red mark bloomed across her cheek, the shape of Marcus's hand, stark against her pale skin. Like mother, like daughter, Marcus sneered, sweeping his eyes across the stunned room. Neither of them knows how to act in public. My father's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Well, maybe she needed a little shame," he said with a shrug, folding his napkin. "Girls today think noise is personality. A little humility goes a long way." Then came my mother's delicate laugh. Valerie never did grasp the value of a quiet woman. Always had to be the center of attention. I snapped out of my frozen disbelief, rushing to Sophie, who had begun sobbing. Her small frame shaking with pain shock and confusion, I scooped her into my arms, fury rising like wildfire. "What is wrong with you?" I hissed at Marcus, who stood with his arms folded, unapologetic. "She's 6, I choked. 6 years old." He didn't flinch. "Then she's old enough to learn the world doesn't bend to her voice. Maybe if someone had taught you that you wouldn't be a single mother pushing paper." "Office coordinator," I snapped, shaking with rage. "And she's not a brat?" she was singing. My father rustled his paper again. "Valerie, you're being dramatic." A little correction never ruined a child. "Look how Marcus turned out compared to how you're spoiling that girl." The room had split, some nodding in agreement, others silent with discomfort. Near the windows, Peter stood frozen by his tripod eyes, wide face, pale. Then I remembered the microphones. The lapel mics Peter had placed. The recorders. It was all on tape. I looked directly at Marcus, then at Peter, then back. Marcus followed my gaze, realization dawning on his face like a cold splash of water. "You know what I said, standing with Sophie clinging to me? We're done here. Nobody lays a hand on my child." "Oh, come off it," my mother snapped. It was barely a tap. "Stop embarrassing yourself." I stared at her in disbelief. Embarrassing myself? My brother just hit a 6-year-old in front of the entire family, and I'm the problem. Marcus took a step toward me, jaw clenched. "Watch your tone." "Call it what you want," I said, backing away. "But where I come from, that's assault, not discipline. And if you think I'm walking out of here without making this right think again, stay away from us. We're leaving," I snapped, my voice trembling, but firm. Running away again, Valerie Marcus called after me as I turned toward the stairs. "That's all you've ever been good at." I didn't look back. My only focus was getting Sophie somewhere safe. As we climbed the stairs to our room, I could already hear the low hum of voices resuming below, like nothing had happened. Like my daughter hadn't just been struck in front of a room full of adults who barely blinked. What they didn't realize was that everything had changed. Marcus had crossed a line that could never be undone. And thanks to my father's obsession with recording the Brooks legacy, I had undeniable proof. In our tiny guest room, I sat Sophie gently on the bed. Her sobs had quieted to hiccups, but the bright red imprint of Marcus's hand was still visible on her cheek. My chest tightened at the sight. I grabbed a washcloth, ran it under cold water, and gently pressed it against her skin. "It hurts, Mommy," she whimpered. Why did Uncle Marcus hit me? Was I being bad? Her words cracked something deep inside me. "No, baby. You were not bad," I said softly, but with conviction. "Uncle Marcus was wrong, so wrong. You were singing and your voice is beautiful." "But Grandpa said Grandpa was wrong too," I said, pulling her into my arms. Nobody should ever hit you, especially not for expressing joy." As Sophie slowly calmed, I began packing our bags with shaking hands. We needed to leave now. I knew how this would play out if we stayed. My family would rewrite the story, diminish it, gaslight Sophie until she questioned her own memory of what happened. A soft knock startled me. I stepped between the door and my daughter. "Who is it?" I called out. "It's Peter," came the quiet reply. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" "Alone." I cracked the door, unsure. "Now's not a good time." Peter's face was drawn, eyes full of concern. "I know, but listen, I got everything on tape." The slap. Marcus's words, your dad's, all of it. He glanced over his shoulder and lowered his voice. "I can make you a copy before anyone realizes and asks me to delete it." A cold calm settled over me. "You do that." He nodded firmly. What Marcus did wasn't discipline, it was assault. And the rest of them? He shook his head. "I married into this family, but I've never seen anything like that." "Linda doesn't know I'm talking to you," Peter added quietly. "Thank you," I whispered. "We're leaving as soon as I finish packing." "Meet me by my car in 20 minutes, he said. "I'll transfer the audio to a USB for you." After he left, I grabbed my phone and called Nina. She answered on the second ring. "How's the Brooks family pressure cooker?" she asked, teasing. "Marcus hit Sophie," I choked out, slapped her across the face for singing, and my parents laughed. What?" Her voice rose, filled with fury. "Val, tell me you're on your way out of there." "Packing right now," I said, zipping our overnight bag. "Good. Come straight here. Don't go home. They might try to guilt you into staying." Or worse. By the time I hung up, Sophie had drifted into a light sleep, worn out from the tears. I finished packing, then knelt beside her. "We're going to visit Aunt Nina," I told her gently. "We need to leave quietly." "Okay?" She nodded, still subdued, in a way that splintered something in me. We tiptoed downstairs, bags in hand, only to be stopped in the foyer by my mother. "Where are you going?" she asked sharply. "Blocking our way." "Home," I said, my voice flat. "Unless you truly expected us to stay after Marcus assaulted my daughter." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. It was hardly a tap. I shifted slightly so she could see the clear handprint on Sophie's cheek. Her expression flickered, hesitation, maybe guilt, but she recovered fast. "Children bruise easily. You're making this bigger than it is." "Bigger than it is," I said, disbelief rising. "Would you say that if someone slapped you for speaking out of turn at breakfast? Or if I slapped Marcus for being a condescending jerk?" "That's different," she insisted, lips tight. "He's an adult. So am I. And so is Sophie. She deserves respect, not violence." Behind her, my father appeared with a glass in hand. "Valerie, don't be hysterical," he said in his familiar dismissive tone. "Come sit. Let's talk this out like adults." "There's nothing left to say," I replied, moving past them toward the door. "We're leaving. If you walk out that door," he warned, voice low and threatening, "don't expect another dime. No more help with rent, no more bailouts." It was meant to stop me cold, to remind me of my financial tightrope and the help they occasionally offered like breadcrumbs. Once that might have worked, but not anymore. Not today. "Keep your money," I said evenly. "It's not worth this." I guided Sophie toward the front door, my hand steady on her back. Marcus emerged from the living room, already nursing a tumbler of whiskey, despite it being barely past 9 a.m. "Running away again, little sister?" he sneered. "Can't handle the fallout from your own mess?" I turned to face him, calm but unflinching. "The only fallout I'm avoiding is letting my daughter grow up thinking it's normal for men to hit children." Enjoy your perfect little life, Marcus. I hope exposing yourself was worth it. His smirk faltered. Is that a threat? No, I replied, pulling open the door. Just an observation, as promised. Peter was waiting by his car in the side driveway, shielded partially by the row of pine trees that lined the property. He handed me a small USB stick, his expression grave. The audio's clear, he said quietly. The slap. Marcus calling you both useless. Your dad saying she needed to learn shame. Even your mom laughing, it's all there. Thank you, I said, lowering my voice. I won't mention your name unless I absolutely have to. He nodded solemnly, then turned and disappeared into the trees. The drive to Nina's apartment was silent. Sophie fell asleep in her booster seat, clutching her stuffed koala. I stared out at the road, my mind spinning. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, my thoughts had solidified into a plan. Nina opened the door before I knocked, pulling Sophie into a warm hug, then me. The guest room's ready, she said. Stay as long as you need. That evening, once Sophie was asleep in the soft, unfamiliar bed, Nina and I sat at her kitchen table. I slid the USB into her laptop. Are you sure you want to hear this again? She asked gently. I have to, I said. I need to hear every word. And I need someone besides me to know what was said. The recording was even worse than I remembered. Marcus's voice sharp and smug. My father's sick approval. My mother's laugh, light cold, complicit. Nina exhaled shakily. Val? That's not just toxic. That's abuse. I know. My voice was low, steady. So what do you do now? I could go to the police, I said. That was assault, but without this recording, which might not be admissible, it's my word against theirs. They'd paint me as the unstable single mom trying to take down her successful family. So you're letting it go? I shook my head. No. If you believe every child deserves to be protected and every voice deserves to be heard, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens when I finally decide to fight back. Marcus crossed a line that day, and there had to be consequences. Real ones. Over the next few days, as Sophie and I adjusted to the quiet rhythm of Nina's apartment, I began researching. First, I took Sophie to her pediatrician, Dr. Susan Winters. She gently examined Sophie and documented the fading bruise on her cheek. Then she gave me a referral. She's showing early signs of trauma, Dr. Winters said softly. Nightmares, clinginess, fear of loud male voices. A child psychologist can help her process it in a healthy way. Next, I reached out to Lisa Tran, a law school friend I'd stayed close with. I brought the audio file and my notes. She listened without speaking, then sat back with a slow exhale. This is damning, she said. Legally, a prosecutor might argue it was a disciplinary misstep, not criminal assault. But in civil court? That's a very different ballgame. I'm not trying to sue Marcus for money, I said quickly. I get that she nodded. But you should know your options. And you should know this recording would be catastrophic for someone with a public-facing career. That struck a chord. Marcus had bragged often about Meridian Financial's ethics code. He once gave a speech about their zero-tolerance policy for misconduct, especially anything involving children, due to their work with family trusts and charitable partnerships. That night, I pulled up his company's website. His bio was nauseating board member of a local children's nonprofit mentor for young entrepreneurs, keynote speaker at youth business summits. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted to protect my daughter and any other child who might cross Marcus's version of discipline. I started building a plan. Every decision weighed for impact, not spite. For Sophie, not me. 3 days after we fled the lake house, Sophie woke up screaming. Uncle Marcus was chasing me. She sobbed. He wanted to hit me again because I was singing. I held her tight, whispering promises of safety. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, my resolve had sharpened. This wasn't just about Sophie. This was about ending a legacy of fear. The next step was clear documentation. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Melissa Garner, the child psychologist Dr. Winters recommended. She was warm but thorough, with a quiet authority that put Sophie at ease. She's showing clear signs of acute stress response, Dr. Garner said after their session. But the good news, children can heal if the adults around them are willing to fight for them. And I was, Doctor. Garner sat with me after Sophie's first full session, her voice steady but gentle. She's exhibiting heightened anxiety around male authority figures, disrupted sleep patterns, and an aversion to activities she once loved, especially singing. Will she be okay? I asked, the weight of my worry pressing down like a stone. With proper support, children are incredibly resilient, she said. But this wasn't a small incident, Valerie. It was trauma. Real trauma. I'd like to see her weekly for now. She handed me a written assessment that detailed Sophie's symptoms and identified the triggering event. It became the first official document in what I now considered a growing file evidence, not for vengeance, but for protection. The next step was the police report. Officer Jenkins took my statement with patience and care. Normally, without obvious physical injuries or a third-party witness, it's difficult to act on incidents that happen within families, she explained. But after listening to the audio, her tone changed. This is something else. This report gives you a legal record. That matters. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed endlessly. My mother's texts pinged between guilt-tripping, "You're breaking your father's heart," and dismissiveness. It was just a little slap. Marcus had graduated from smug dismissal, "Get over yourself," to outright threats. "You'll regret dragging this out." I answered none of them. Instead, I focused on the recording. I created a short, clean version, unedited, but selectively clipped to highlight the most damning moments, the unmistakable crack of the slap. Marcus's useless remark, my father's comment about Sophie needing to learn shame, and my mother's brittle laugh. No commentary, just their voices. Then I wrote a brief professional message describing what had happened. Calm, factual. No emotion, no embellishment. I sent it to 3 carefully chosen recipients. First, to the board of directors at Meridian Financial, where Marcus was vice president. Second, to the leadership of Bright Futures Youth Alliance, the nonprofit, where he served as a board member. Third, to the Lone Star Business Mentorship Program, where he regularly mentored high school students. In each email, I requested confidentiality regarding my identity, citing concern for my daughter's privacy. Tara, a close friend from my support group, stood beside me as I hovered over the send button on the final message. "Are you sure?" she asked. "There's no going back from this." I nodded, hand trembling just slightly. He took Sophie's voice. "The least I can do is make sure someone listens." And with that, I clicked send. I'm sure I told Tara, thinking of Sophie's tearful question, "Was I bad?" No child should ever question their worth because an adult lost control. Marcus made his choice when he struck a 6-year-old for singing. What followed were simply consequences. Within hours, my phone lit up like a siren. Marcus had found out. I suspected someone on the board had contacted him directly. His messages came rapid fire, first threatening, then panicked. "What did you do?" "The board just called an emergency meeting. They're talking about suspending me. You need to fix this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." My parents weren't far behind. My father's texts were cold and scathing. "You've humiliated this family for attention." My mother's tone shifted from defensive to desperate. "Please call us. We can fix this together." I blocked them all. That evening, Peter called, his voice low. "Marcus is melting down at your parents' place. They know I recorded it, but not that I gave you a copy. He's threatening to sue you for defamation," Peter added. "Let him try," I said, calm. "Truth is a complete defense. I didn't accuse him. I shared exactly what he did and said with the people who should know." Peter sighed. "Your parents are calling you unstable. They're saying you've always resented Marcus, that this is about money or your divorce." I laughed bitterly. "Of course they are. It's easier than admitting their golden boy hit a kindergartner for being happy." The next morning, my phone rang again from a number I didn't recognize. It was Kendall Marcus's wife. "Valerie," she said, her voice tight. Can we meet somewhere private? We agreed on a coffee shop, halfway between our homes. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. Normally flawless and polished, Kendall now looked worn down, eyes red, dark circles visible even under makeup. I heard the recording, she said, sliding into the booth. Peter played it for Linda. She called me. I nodded, unsure where she was going. I need to ask. She hesitated, her hand gripping her wedding band. Was this the first time Marcus has done something like this? To Sophie? Yes, I said, but the anger's always been there. He usually aimed it at me. Never liked that, though. She looked down at her untouched coffee. He has a temper at home, too. Never physical. But the way he spoke to Sophie, that word useless, I've heard it before. She didn't need to finish. I already knew. Marcus wasn't just a problem in our past. He was a danger in hers, too. Directed at me. Those words hit harder than I expected. Something shifted in my understanding of Kendall's silence over the years. Kendall, are you okay? I asked, my voice low. Her eyes welled up. I don't know anymore. When all this started with the job, the charity, he threw a glass across the kitchen. Blamed me for not defending him to my father, who happens to golf with one of the Meridian board members. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't, she said firmly. Marcus did this. And maybe I needed to see him clearly. She sat up straighter. I told him I'm staying with my sister for a while. He needs to get help. Serious help. As Kendall and I parted ways, my phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Grace, my supervisor at Horizon Events. Just got a strange call from someone named Marcus Brooks asking about your employment. Said he might list you as a reference. I didn't give him anything. Is everything okay? I exhaled sharply. Marcus was clearly trying to dig into my life, looking for leverage. I texted Grace back with a short summary and included the audio file as backup. Her reply was immediate. Oh my God, Valerie, that's horrific. Take as much time as you need for Sophie. Your job is safe. And if anyone contacts us again, we'll shut it down fast. Meanwhile, the fallout for Marcus spread quickly. By the end of the week, Meridian Financial had placed him on administrative leave while they launched a formal internal review. The Bright Futures Youth Alliance released a statement removing him from their board, citing their zero-tolerance policy regarding child welfare. The mentorship program followed suit, a mutual pause, they called it. Then came the ripple effects. Parents from Sophie's school, neighbors, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, messaged me with support. Many had their own stories hidden. Bruises, cruel words passed off as tough love. A quiet, resilient community began forming around Sophie and me, full of empathy and strength. Marcus tried spinning his version, of course. Claimed I edited the audio, that I was weaponizing Sophie over a family money dispute. But once people heard the raw recording, few believed him. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Peter. I wanted you to know, he said gently. Several family members have come to me quietly. Turns out, Marcus's temper wasn't new. They've seen him get physical with other nieces and nephews before. The truth was finally unraveling. They were too afraid of your parents' reaction to speak up, Peter told me, but they're supporting you now. The revelation that Marcus's behavior may have impacted other children in the family only deepened my resolve. This was no longer just about Sophie. It was about breaking a toxic cycle, abuse disguised as discipline that had been quietly harming children under the guise of keeping order. If no one stopped it, it would continue. As the fallout from Marcus's actions spread publicly, his messages turned frantic. He alternated between threatening legal action and sending long, guilt-laced texts about family loyalty and betrayal. I responded to none of them. My focus remained where it belonged, on Sophie's healing and rebuilding our lives. The foundation was in place. The truth had been spoken, recorded, and acknowledged. What came next depended on whether Marcus or my parents could ever face it. By the third week after the lake house, Marcus's world had begun to shrink. Meridian Financial concluded its investigation by stripping him of his vice president title, reassigning him to a back-office compliance role with reduced pay and zero public visibility. The Bright Futures Youth Alliance issued a permanent ban, and perhaps, most embarrassing for Marcus, word had spread through his upscale social circle. Invitations stopped. Questions started. Peter kept me updated. Your parents are in full damage control, he told me during one call. They're telling everyone you've always been unstable. Jealous of Marcus, I sighed. That's the same story they've used my whole life. Doesn't make it true. What I hadn't expected was the family fracture that followed. My Aunt Catherine, my mother's older sister, called me unexpectedly one evening. Her usual composure was gone, her voice tight with guilt. I saw him hit Sophie. She confessed. I was across the room. I froze. I didn't say anything. I've felt sick about it ever since. Why are you telling me this now? I asked gently. Because your parents are asking the family to unite against you, she said. They're claiming you exaggerated everything, but I can't lie for them. What Marcus did was wrong, and your parents defending it, that's worse. Catherine wasn't alone. One by one, other relatives reached out. Some offered direct support. Others simply confirmed they had seen or heard what happened. The family was splitting not by loyalty, but by conscience. And quietly, Sophie was healing. Dr. Garner said her nightmares had become less frequent, but she still tensed any time a man raised his voice nearby. Her healing would take time, but it had begun. Most encouraging of all, Sophie had started singing again. At first, it was barely a whisper, soft hums while coloring or brushing her doll's hair. Then slowly, her voice returned, growing bolder with each passing day. Every time I heard her, I made sure to stop, smile, and say, "Your voice is beautiful. Always." A few weeks after the incident, my grandmother Martha, my father's mother, and the family's undisputed matriarch called me directly. "This has gone far enough," she said firmly. "I want both sides of the story, and I want this family to make peace." "There aren't two sides to hitting a child, Grandma," I said. She paused. "Perhaps not, but there still needs to be resolution." Sunday, 2:00, my house. "I expect you there." I wasn't sure if it was a command or an invitation. I consulted Dr. Garner before deciding. Her guidance was immediate and firm. "Do not bring Sophie. This is adult business now. She shouldn't be exposed to conflict or forced to revisit her trauma." Tara agreed to watch her, so I went alone. Driving toward Grandma Martha's grand Victorian home in the heart of San Antonio, my stomach tightened. I hadn't seen Marcus or my parents since the lake house. And now that their golden boy had suffered real-world consequences, I had no idea how they'd behave. The tension in the parlor was thick when I arrived. My parents sat side by side on a floral sofa, stiff and unblinking. My mother wore her usual tight-lipped expression. Only her eyes betrayed her fury. Marcus and Kendall sat apart. She by the window, he slouched near the fireplace, face pale and eyes red. The rest of the room was filled with familiar faces, my aunts, uncles, cousins, all uncharacteristically quiet. Then Grandma Martha entered. At 87, she moved slowly, leaning on her cane, but her presence still commanded every room she entered. "I've lived long enough to see 5 generations of this family," she said, standing at the center. "And I've never been more disappointed than I am today." My father sat up straighter. "Mother, if you just let us explain." "Howard," she cut in sharply. "I may be old, but I'm not senile." Peter shared the recording with me. I heard what happened. The room froze. She turned to Marcus. "You struck a 6-year-old child for singing, then insulted both her and her mother. Your behavior was inexcusable." Marcus's cheeks flushed. "It wasn't that hard a slap. Everyone's overreacting." "Be quiet," Grandma snapped. "When a grown man hits a child," my grandmother said firmly, "the force is irrelevant. It's the breach of trust, the abuse of power." She turned to my parents. "And you too encouraged it, laughed at it, dismissed it." My mother's mask of composure finally cracked. "Martha, you don't understand. Valerie has always been difficult, always exaggerating." Colleen, my grandmother, cut in sharply. "I raised your husband. I know exactly where Marcus learned that behavior." Her gaze turned to my father, whose expression had gone ghostly pale. "Howard was disciplined harshly by his father," she said, "too harshly. And I regret every day that I didn't do more to stop it." I won't make that mistake again. A heavy silence settled over the room. My father stared at his hands, as if they were foreign. Valerie Grandma Martha continued. You did what I should have done decades ago. You protected your child even when it cost you everything. For that you have my respect. I hadn't expected her support. For a moment, I couldn't find words. That said, she went on this family is now at a crossroads. Healing is possible, but only if we begin with accountability. Marcus pushed off the fireplace mantle, his voice rising. Accountability. I've been publicly humiliated, demoted at work, booted from the charity board I helped build. Isn't that enough for one slap? I found my voice again. This isn't about punishment, Marcus. It's about impact. Sophie has nightmares. She stopped singing the one thing that gave her joy. She asked me if she was bad. My throat tightened. A 6-year-old girl believed she deserved to be hit because the adults she trusted made her feel wrong for having a voice. I didn't mean Marcus began, then faltered. His voice dropped. I didn't mean to. That's just it, I said. You didn't mean to traumatize her. You just meant to control her, to make her small and quiet, just like this family always tried to do to me. But intentions don't undo impact. My father stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We've entertained this melodrama long enough. Marcus made a mistake, sure, but Valerie destroyed his reputation out of spite. No Howard. My grandmother said her voice like steel. Valerie showed people who Marcus really is. He destroyed his own reputation with his own actions. My mother gasped. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side of that child, my grandmother said. The one none of you protected but her. Grandma Martha's voice rang out with finality. I should have stopped all of this years ago. The confrontation only escalated from there. Decades of buried resentment and dysfunction spilled into the open as relatives found the courage to speak their truths. Aunt Catherine recounted witnessing my father discipline me harshly as a child, while Marcus always received patient, understanding guidance. Cousin Jennifer revealed that Marcus had once twisted her son's arm during a past family reunion for talking back. Uncle Robert reluctantly admitted he had seen Marcus shove a business partner during a heated golf match, but brushed it off because, in his words, that's how men sort things out. A pattern emerged, one of Marcus's unchecked aggression and my parents' habitual enabling. With each confession, Marcus's expression grew darker, and my parents' denials began to crumble. Then Kendall spoke. Her voice was soft, but unwavering. I'm filing for separation. The room went completely still, what Marcus turned to her visibly shaken. This whole incident made me face what I've been avoiding for years, she said. The way you speak to me when you're angry, the things you break, the pit I feel in my stomach when you pull into the driveway after drinking. I've never hit you, Marcus shot back. No? Kendall agreed, but hearing how you talked to Sophie, seeing your parents defend it, I realized what direction we were heading. My mother made one last desperate attempt. Kendall, every marriage has hard moments. You don't throw away a life together over one outburst. It's not one moment, Kendall replied. It's a pattern, and I won't wait to see how far it goes. The meeting stretched on for nearly 3 hours, but by the end, several truths were undeniable. The family would never be the same. People had taken sides not by blood but by principle. Marcus had lost more than his job title. He'd lost the protective web that once shielded him from consequence. My parents were left at a crossroads, acknowledge the damage they'd enabled, or lose connection with the people who could no longer look away, including me and Sophie. As the meeting dispersed, Grandma Martha squeezed my hand. This won't be easy, she said softly, but something shifted today. And that matters. In the weeks that followed, the fallout continued. Marcus's company issued a vague public statement reaffirming their commitment to family values. He was ordered to attend anger management counseling as a condition of continued employment. Kendall moved out and filed for legal separation. During coffee one afternoon, through tears, she confided that she'd suffered 2 miscarriages during their marriage and now wondered if the constant stress of walking on eggshells had played a role. As for my parents, they began to reach out haltingly. Their attempts at reconciliation were awkward and hollow, clearly more about appearances than remorse. My mother called one evening to invite me to Sunday dinner. She never mentioned the incident, never said Sophie's name. Just a casual, "It's been a while. Let's all sit down together." My father sent an email a few days later calling everything a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. I didn't engage. Instead, I replied with clarity and boundaries. If they wanted any relationship with Sophie and me moving forward, they would need to acknowledge the harm they had caused and take concrete steps to ensure her emotional and physical safety. But the most profound shift wasn't in them, it was in me. I used to believe mistreatment was something I just had to endure, that keeping the peace was more important than protecting my peace. That family ties required sacrifice, even when those sacrifices came at the expense of my dignity or my daughter's well-being. I don't believe that anymore. 6 months after the lake house, I sat across from Dr. Garner for a therapy update. "She's doing remarkably well," she said, smiling. "Children are resilient, especially when they feel safe. And Sophie has a secure, loving attachment to you. That's everything." I didn't stop it from happening. I admitted quietly, the guilt still flickering in the background. "No," she said gently. "But you did everything right after. You believed her, you acted, you got her help, and you held the person accountable. That's why she's healing." Driving home, I thought about how much had changed. Our little apartment once, a tight fit after the divorce, now felt like a haven. It echoed with Sophie singing again, something I thought we might have lost forever. But she sang in the shower, in the car, in the kitchen while we made pancakes. And just last week, she joined the children's choir at the local community center. "She's singing again," I told Dr. Garner during our last visit, the words catching in my throat. "Not just at home, she's performing again." "That's a milestone," she replied with a warm smile. "That's a girl reclaiming her joy." The journey ahead wouldn't be simple. Family bonds had been tested, and some had frayed beyond repair. But I no longer measured family by genetics. I measured it by love, safety, and respect. And as I walked forward with Sophie's hand in mine and my head finally held high, I knew we weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. "It means she no longer associates her voice with punishment or shame," Dr. Garner said gently. That simple sentence stayed with me. It meant Sophie had reclaimed something no child should ever lose joy in her self-expression. The ripple effects of what happened at the lake house had extended far beyond just Sophie and me. Marcus had completed the anger management therapy required by his employer, though his once soaring career had been permanently stunted. The former golden child now worked a quiet back-office job with no client contact and little visibility. His marriage hadn't survived either. 3 months after their separation, Kendall filed for divorce. Publicly, it was irreconcilable differences. Privately, she told me the truth during one of our now regular lunch meetings. That day with Sophie, it shattered my denial, she admitted. I started wondering what might have happened if we'd had kids. Would I have recognized the signs? Or would I have protected him the way your parents did? Marcus. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. After several failed attempts to gloss over everything, they finally agreed to attend family therapy. Our first session was tense. My father tried to dominate the conversation. My mother alternated between teary silence and veiled jabs about airing private matters. "Reconciliation requires accountability," the therapist said firmly. "And accountability starts with acknowledging harm." It took 3 sessions before my father finally said the words I thought I'd never hear. "I should have stopped Marcus," instead of encouraging him. What he did to Sophie was wrong. My mother took longer. Her role as peacekeeper ran deep. "I just wanted everyone to get along," she sobbed during our 5th session. "I've always tried to smooth things over." "That's what mothers do?" "No," I said gently. "Mothers protect their children even when it's uncomfortable, especially then." Progress came slowly. They still hadn't earned unsupervised time with Sophie, but we had set up short, structured visits in public places. I watched my father learn to meet Sophie on her level, letting her lead conversations, resisting correction. My mother, too, began catching herself before she offered passive critiques. The family division that had once felt like a tear in our foundation now felt like a cleansing. Relatives who had stayed silent for years finally spoke their truths. Connections, once strained by expectation, began to strengthen through mutual respect. And my grandmother Martha, now 87, had become one of my greatest allies. "I made mistakes with your father," she told me over tea. "I saw the signs. I just thought that's how men were back then." By the time I realized the harm, it was already passed down. Her honesty helped me name the cycle and break it. More importantly, it strengthened my resolve to end the cycle with me. What I didn't expect was how that resolve would ripple into every area of my life. At work, I carried myself differently, more assertive, more grounded. When a project management role opened up at Madison Marketing, I hesitated. I'd always seen myself as capable, but not quite leadership material. Still, I applied. To my surprise, I got it. Your composure during the crisis with Sophie Grace, said during my promotion interview, was a masterclass in leadership. Strategic thinking, calm under pressure, clear communication, ethical decision-making. We need more of that. The raise meant I no longer needed financial help from my parents. That final thread of control was cut quietly and permanently. The biggest surprise came through a support group I joined for parents coping with intergenerational trauma. One meeting turned into many. Over time, I shared our story cautiously, at first, then more openly. I wasn't alone. Others began opening up too. With encouragement from the group facilitator, I began speaking at local parenting workshops on breaking cycles of dysfunction. People connect with your story, the facilitator told me. Because it's not just about what happened. It's about what you chose to do after. 7 months after that afternoon at the lake house, we hosted what Sophie proudly named our chosen family celebration. It was just a simple get-together at our small Austin apartment with apple cider fall leaves on the balcony and pumpkin muffins from Tara. She came, of course, along with Peter and his 2 boys. He and Aunt Linda had quietly separated months ago. Kendall arrived with her sister. Some colleagues from work dropped by, as did a few folks from the support group. But the biggest surprise came when my grandmother Martha arrived with my mother Colleen walking slowly behind her. It was the first time my mother had reached out on her own since everything unfolded. As the chatter swirled around our little living room, Sophie tugged on my sleeve. "Mom?" she whispered. "Can I sing the song now?" "You sure?" I asked gently. She nodded. I practiced with Miss Kim at choir. I called everyone's attention. Sophie stood by the window, sunlight casting a soft glow around her. And then she sang not the animated theme that Marcus had tried to silence, but a soft ballad about bravery, joy, and finding your voice. Her voice rang out clear and unwavering. As I watched her head, high hands steady, I felt tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness, but from awe. This was what healing looked like. When she finished, applause broke out across the room. My mother clutched a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. "She has a beautiful voice," she said softly. "I should have said that before." "Yes," I replied. "You should have." There was a pause. Then I added, "But what matters more is what we do now." Later, after everyone left and Sophie was asleep, I stepped onto our little balcony. The Austin skyline glowed faintly in the distance. These 7 months had tested me in every way, emotionally, financially, spiritually. I had lost family but gained truth. I had faced betrayal but found strength. And more than anything, I had shown my daughter that she was worth standing up for. The work wasn't done. There would still be therapy, awkward family sessions, hard boundaries to reinforce. But I faced that work with open eyes and a steady heart. Marcus's slap was meant to silence Sophie. Instead, it amplified every truth our family had buried for decades. In trying to shame her voice, he gave mine new power. As mothers, we cannot always shield our children from pain, but we can show them what it means to rise, to protect, to rebuild. That day taught me something I'll never forget. Some family ties must be severed for healing to begin, and others can be rewoven into something far stronger and far more beautiful than they ever were before. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family to protect someone you love? Your words matter more than you know, especially to people still finding their strength. If you believe every child deserves to feel safe and every parent deserves to be heard when they speak the truth, consider subscribing. I'm just one mom who refused to stay silent, but together we can shine a light on what too many try to keep hidden. Speak up, set boundaries, and never apologize for protecting your peace.